Joyful pilgrims, northing the mountains long, my faith is ever rising with every tuneful song. Lo, on the mount of dancing, the glorious mount I stand, and looking over Jordan, I see the promised land. Sing on with music, with every note raised. My heart is filled with rapture, my soul is lost in praise. Sing on this music, with every note raised. My heart is filled with rapture, my soul is lost in praise. Sing on, ye joyful pilgrims, while here on earth we stay. Let songs of home and Jesus sing out its sweet day. Sing on the grand old story of His redeeming love, the everlasting chorus that fills the of love. Sing on this music, with every note raised. My heart is filled with rapture, my soul is lost in praise. Sing on this music, with every note raised. My heart is filled with rapture, my soul is lost in praise. Sing on, ye joyful pilgrims, the time will not be long, till in our Father's kingdom we swell another song, where those we love are waiting to greet us on the shore. We'll be beyond the river, where serpents roll no more. Sing on the whistle music, with every note raised. My heart is filled with rapture, my soul is lost in praise. Sing on the whistle music, with every note you raise. My heart is filled with rapture, my soul is lost in praise. Page 81, 881. After the song, turn it over to Brother. I'm satisfied with just how we go, a little silver and a little gold. But in that city, where the lights will shine, I want to go on that silver line. I've got a mansion just over the hilltop, in that bright land where we'll never grow road. And someday yonder, we'll never more wander, but walk the streets that are glorious gold. Don't think me poor or misery or lonely, I'm not discouraged, I'm heaven bound. I'm just a pilgrim in search of the city. I want a mansion, a road crown. I've got a mansion just over the hilltop, in that bright land where we'll never roam. And someday yonder, we'll never wander, but walk the streets that are purest gold. Mark your Psalms, page 922, 922.
Yeah. Oh, it's all right. I was like, when I walked out of the hospital last night, I noticed that I had alert that there was no power at the camp. And Casey was there. And this morning she tried to go to work, had no power, no coffee. You know, I didn't want to be on the phone very long. So she had coffee. And she went up, rode a little bit, and there was a tree across the road. And there was a police officer there, a sheriff that lives down in our area somewhere. Sheriff deputy, and he was like, she said, well, how am I supposed to get to work? He goes, I don't know. I'm on the side over here, and I can't go home. I've been working all night, and I have to stay here till it gets clear. So I think he was about as happy as she was, and she had to make her way back, and there was a line down across the road not far from him, and he had told her that. And so they had to get the tree out of the way before they get it, and I got alert about 3 o'clock. Up to then, they were giving no ETA on return for power. So about 3 o'clock, I got alert that their estimated restoration of power Saturday at noon. 490 people are affected by this. So she decided that she would go back and clean out the freezer and the refrigerator, throw all that away. So that's where she is. Chapter 9 of Daniel. Chapter 9 has a lot of things in it. It gives us a date, a timing of it, that Daniel sees it. In the first year of Darius, the son of Ahasuerus, of the lineage of the Medes, who was made king over the realm of the Chaldeans. Makes it real clear here how that it's over Babylon, that area. Not that he was king over the entire Persian Empire, but rather that he was a king over Babylon. Persia originated the term King of Kings, because that's what they would do. They would put kings in places of provinces. In the first year of his reign, I, Daniel, understood by the books the number of the years specified by the word of the Lord through Jeremiah the prophet. Notice that. Books. That he would accomplish 70 years in the desolation of Jerusalem. Actually, that's in verse 3. Then I set my face toward the Lord God to make requests by prayer and supplications with fasting, sackcloth, and ashes. Jeremiah 25, 8 through 13 actually explains that God appointed Nebuchadnezzar to rule over them for 70 years. Specifies it. And after 70 years, that he would punish the Chaldeans. I know a guy that once said that he realized vengeance was the Lord's, but he was glad when he was his instrument. Well, now let me explain something to you. Nebuchadnezzar and the Chaldeans was God's instruments of vengeance upon Israel. And then they had to suffer the consequences of their actions, even though he allowed it to happen. And so, but the interesting part is books. We know that definitely Jeremiah is part of it. He says it. What other books? Some think maybe Isaiah, some of the others. But it's interesting how much Daniel had access to. This is near the end of that 70 years. And so Jeremiah is probably long dead. His word is complete. So he's got access to that letter, first plainly said. It is obviously through his prayer that he also has the Pentateuch. Notice, and I prayed to the Lord my God and made confession and said, O Lord, great and awesome God, who keeps his covenant and mercy with those who love him and with those who keep his commandments. We have sinned and committed iniquity. We have done wickedly and rebelled. Notice the pronoun. Not they, not your people. We. Daniel says we. You ever think that maybe Daniel feels like if not for being part of the carried away, he would have been right there in it? If it had not been carried away, if God had not, and the things that continued, it was a good possibility that he would have been a part of it. I think that's what he meant. It's good. Unlike those Pharisees that was in Jesus' time, if we had been alive at that time, that it never happened. Daniel says, we have done wickedly and rebelled, even by departing from your precepts and your judgments. Neither have we heeded your servants, the prophets, who spoke in your name to our kings and our princes, to our fathers and all the people of the land. O Lord, righteousness belongs to you. You're righteous. But to us, shame of face as it is this day, to the men of Judah, to the inhabitants of Jerusalem and all Israel, those near and those far off, and all the countries to which you have driven them, because of the unfaithfulness which they have committed against you. O Lord, to us belongs the shame of face. You ever have anybody tell you ought to be ashamed? David said, or Daniel said, we deserve shame. To our kings, our princes, and our fathers, because we have sinned against you. To the Lord our God belong mercy and forgiveness, which we have rebelled against, though we have rebelled against him. We have not obeyed the voice of the Lord our God to walk in his laws, which he set before us by his servants the prophets. Yes, all Israel has transgressed your law and has departed as not your voice. Therefore, the curse and oath written in the law of Moses, the servant of God, have been poured out on us because we have sinned against him. You go back to Deuteronomy, he tells them, if you keep these commandments, prosper. But if you leave, God will leave this land desolate. And he has confirmed his words, which he spoke against us and against our judges who judged us, by bringing upon us a great disaster. For under the whole heaven such has never been done as what has been done to Jerusalem. As it is written in the law of Moses, all this disaster has come upon us, yet we have not made our prayer before the Lord our God, that we might turn from our iniquities and understand your truth. That's kind of important right there. Daniel said it took all this, and still the majority of our nation has not turned to pray to you. Think about Jeremiah's time. Old high priest, when Jeremiah prophesied 70 years, not 70 years, 7 years. Therefore, the Lord has kept the disaster in mind and brought it upon us, for the Lord our God is righteous in all the works which he does, though we have not obeyed his voice. And now, O Lord our God, who brought your people out of the land of Egypt with a mighty hand and made yourself a name as it is this day, we have sinned, we have done wickedly. What do you have to do before you can ask for forgiveness?
Change your ways.
Change your ways. Okay. What's the other one? You got, and you said generally repent. You got to change your ways, as Don said. That's part of repentance. But you got to admit. You got to admit it. If we confess our sin, you've got to confess it. You've got to admit it. Hey, we were the ones in the wrong. O Lord, according to all your righteousness, now I'm going to plead for mercy. First, admit that everything we deserve, everything that's happened to us. Let your anger and your fury be turned away from your city, Jerusalem, your holy mountain, because of our sins and for the iniquities of our fathers. Jerusalem and your people are a reproach to all those around us. Now, therefore, our God, hear the prayer of your servant and his supplication, and for the Lord's sake, cause your face to shine on your sanctuary, which is desolate. O my God, incline your ear and hear upon your eyes and see our desolations of the city which is called by your name. For we do not present our supplication before you because of our righteous deeds, but because of your great mercies. O Lord, hear. O Lord, forgive. O Lord, listen and act. Do not delay for your own sake, my God, for your city and your people are called by your name. What does he do? He's praying for him to do what he said he could do, bring an end to that 70 years. Show mercy upon them. And that's important. When the children of Israel had sinned by making the golden calf, what did Moses do about them? He actually prayed to God and said asked for him to forgive them, but if he would not forgive them, not to blot their names out, but to blot out his own name in place of them. He pled for mercy for the people. Daniel is doing the same thing, pleaded for mercy for the people. And it's interesting because the rest of the few verses have to do with the answer to Daniel's prayer. And it's interesting. In fact, it's the most important part of this chapter. Now, while I was speaking, praying, and confessing my sin, the sin of my people Israel, and presenting my supplication before the Lord my God, for the holy mountain of my God, yes, while I was speaking in prayer, the man Gabriel, whom I had seen in the vision at the beginning, that vision back in chapter 7, probably 10 to 12 years beforehand. Notice, being caused to fly swiftly, reached me about the time of the evening offering and informed me and talked with me and said, O Daniel, I have now come forth to give you skill to understand. Daniel, there's things you still do not understand. At the beginning of your supplications, the command went out. And I have come to tell you, for you are greatly beloved, therefore consider the matter and understand the vision. You're getting a new vision, Daniel. And it's different. 70 weeks are determined for your people and for your holy city, to finish the transgression, to make an end of sins, to make reconciliation for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy. How long is 70 weeks? If it's literally 70 weeks, it's about a year and a half, not even about a year and a half, 490 days. That comes up. But notice what all he says this is for. 70 weeks are determined. For your holy city. That's Jerusalem. To finish the transgression. To make an end of sins. To make reconciliation for iniquity. And everlasting righteousness. To finish the transgressions of your people. To let them come to an end. To the final point of what they're going to do. To make an end of sins. What does that mean? He'll explain it, but let's think about it. What brings an end to sins? Think on our side versus Daniel's side.
Blood had to be shed.
Blood had to be shed. This is what I'm talking about. Make reconciliation for iniquity. 2 Corinthians 5:18. God was within him, reconciling to himself. To bring in everlasting righteousness. I'm not ashamed of the gospel of Jesus Christ, for it is the power of God unto salvation. Therein is the righteousness of God revealed from faith to faith. The new covenant. To seal up vision and prophecy, bring an end to the Old Testament, to anoint the most holy. Here we go. Gabriel speaking. Know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the command to restore and build Jerusalem until Messiah the Prince, there shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. The street shall be built again, and the wall even in troublesome times. And after the 62 weeks, Messiah shall be cut off, but not for himself, and the people of the prince who is to come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. The end of it shall be with a flood, and until the end of the war of desolations are determined. Then he shall confirm a covenant with many for 1 week, but in the middle of the week he shall bring an end to sacrifice and offering. And on the wing of abomination shall be one who makes desolate, even until the consummation which is determined is poured out on the desolate. Okay? Everybody that tries to come up with the exact number on this week, and we're going to go through some of this, tend to put it as each week is a period of 7 years. And it gets pretty close. The question come in is, and this is from Wayne Jackson. He points this out in this prophecy, and this is what he brings, and this is forward, he can pretty well go. The Messiah's earthly event and purpose is verse 24. The beginning point of the prophetical 70 weeks, that's in verse 25, from the going forth of the command to go back. The initial phrase of the prophecy, the rebuilding of Jerusalem. Verse 26 gives the Messiah's death, Jerusalem and the temple to be destroyed because Jewish rejection of the Messiah. The Messiah's covenant replaces the former covenant and the full end of the Jewish system. In verse 27. And this is from Wayne Jackson, Bond 15 of the Christian Courier, issue 5, 6, September, November 1979. He goes into a great list of these things explaining it. And it makes good reading. Because here's what he doesn't do. He doesn't try to say which decree went forward. There were actually 3 decrees that sent people back. The first one was Cyrus, was around 536 BC. That's when Zerubbabel returned. After that was Artaxerxes' first decree, around 457 BC, and that was when Ezra returned. And then Artaxerxes sent another decree out when he sent Nehemiah back because the temple had not been finished. Here is the thing of it. Even if you go 536 BC and you go 490 years, you come about 40 years short. If you take 457 BC and Ezra returned and account for the fact that there would be no year 0, you'd end up 1 year BC and then 1 year AD. You come up to 26 BC. About the time that most would say that Jesus was baptized and John began his ministry. Okay? If you take Artaxerxes' second decree, 444 BC, you're going to end up at about 50 AD. So you have 69 weeks of 7 years and 483 weeks, and then you have 70 weeks and 70 years per week, 490 years. But I want you to go back and I want you to notice something. Before you go through all this, in his point, he said after the 62 weeks, Messiah shall be cut off, but not for himself. I'm not sure that's about his death, but I think that is talking about after the 62 weeks. So you had the 7 weeks, the 62 weeks, 69 weeks. At the end of the 69 weeks, Messiah cut off, but not for himself. I'm not sure if that's the point of his ministry, because in the middle of that week is where it seems that his the new week is where his ministry is formed. And notice in the middle week, he shall bring an end to sacrifice and offering. What does that mean? One sacrifice, once for all. No more need to be made. What was being done in the temple was being done in vain from that point on. Bringing an end to it. And then, of course, it says, on the wings of abomination shall be one who makes desolate, even until the consummation which is determined is poured out on the desert. Here comes that point to talk about the Roman destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70. There is no way that you can take those beginning point out and take 490 years and get to the destruction of AD 70. Unless you make that last week that it period of 70 years and you make it hit 0 or hit year 1. It's a holy number, as we do so many times. Yeah. When we look at these holy numbers from God, complete number of God, 7, 10, 12. So it's most likely that God is saying this is the completeness of it, the 70.
I'm looking at
And I'm just gonna throw this out. He's saying 62 weeks. The one interpretation maintains that the 62 weeks can be added to the 7 weeks of verse 25. Total 69 weeks or 483 years, and that's going to take us to the crucifixion.
Yeah, and that's what a lot will hold to is to that point. The problem is you get to the crucifixion, what do you do with that 1 week? You still have a week left over. That's my point. If you start with, let's go back. The rules time, you don't get anywhere near. If you start with Artaxerxes at 457, you get to 26 AD, which are still 3 years short of the crucifixion. If you take that last week and say, okay, that's to be split in half to 3.5, then you're right there at the crucifixion with that 17th week. I was looking at that, and I was trying to figure out, and I was trying to take these numbers, and Brother Daughtery, he points out all this stuff, and he really doesn't say yay or nay to any of it, whether he holds to it or not. So he gives all the things that said. I think it's very close, very accurate. If you take it right. The only thing that bothered me about was that first 7 weeks.
Now, they're also talking about a 360-day year here instead of 365 days. Apparently, calendars have changed or something like that. So there's some adjustments that they made called the calendar year. And he's also talking about the question of the decree, whether Artaxerxes and Nehemiah 2 at 445 BC, with the adjustment allowed for the use of 360-day year. The end of the 69 weeks concludes with the day of the crucifixion too. So that's they're adding that up. But of course, it's very confusing, and I'm no authority on it. So just that's what they're talking about.
Yeah.
And I know from what I have read, there's a lot of different theories.
There's a lot of different theories, and that's the point I'm throwing this one out there. And this is straight out of Brother Daughtery's commentary. First 7 weeks equal 49 years from the going forth. 62 weeks equals 434 years, and is about that of the intertestament period. Malachi is believed to be written somewhere between 445 and 432 BC, which gives you the last or the beginning of that intertestamental period. But it would have been written at the same time as the 62 weeks, the beginning of this, or beginning of the from going forth, 7 weeks. If you go with Artaxerxes' first point. John's ministry begins approximately 26 AD. Jesus is anointed or baptized in the first year of John's ministry, beginning his own ministry about 6 months after John. Then that last week is divided as 3.5 year period. And puts it right at the crucifixion, especially if you make that adjustment, as Don pointed out, for 360-day years. So you get into these, and it would seem for that why God divided that 7 weeks, and then really it's the 62 weeks. I think the 62 weeks is to point out that 430 years intertestament period. Because that's about what we have, is 430 years, where they have no problem. In that going forth of that 50 years, according to who you use, and like I say, if you wait to Artaxerxes, you're coming in, if I'm not mistaken, somewhere after Esther. Definitely, well, let me take that 4 Ezra, but in Ezra and Nehemiah. The important thing is to realize, I think the most important thing is, as Don pointed out, that 483 years is to get you from the call of going out, the return, somewhere in the returning of the children of Israel to Jerusalem, and the rebuilding of the temple and of the wall, even though that took several years, but in that point from, get you from there to understand that there's going to come a time when that Messiah is anointed. And then you have that half week. That's really what you have in that last week, is that half week, which is Jesus' ministry. That 3.5 years. Because at the end of that ministry is when you have the end of the temple sacrifices being accepted by God. That's when you have the completeness of the end of sins, forgiveness of sins. The everlasting righteousness that comes forth. It's one of the deals that if we try to say exactly here, exactly here, exactly here, we can get in trouble. But if we can look at the lump sum, we get there. And we see it. Jesus said that the law and the prophets were until John. Sealed a bit, that point of making of sealing prophecy and vision. What he's saying is that is coming to a close. The Old Testament is closed with John. John the Baptist. John the Baptist. Because at that point he says, and now is the kingdom of heaven preached, and all men being pressed into it. So I'd say some trying to take it by force. People wanting it, I think, is the most probably accurate thing to be brought in.
He was preaching that
The kingdom of heaven is at hand.
he's a head, but
Yeah.
it is here. I mean, it is him. So that's
Right. And then when
He
Jesus,
hadn't died yet. So
he hadn't died yet, but when Jesus spoke, he said, the law and the prophets are until John. In other words, he is saying, this is closed. This is closed. Everything, even though he lived under the law, everything he was doing was leading to the kingdom of heaven.
and God went quiet in
In that intertestament from Malachi to John, there was
God
gold.
just let it open back up.
Yeah. Elijah crying in the wilderness. That's a reference to John.
That's what. And Jesus said that.
Yeah, and Jesus explains that himself. So when we get into that and get to looking at it, the important thing is from when time Daniel is reading this, and he's saying that call from going forth, and this is the first year of Darius to be. The hard part is you get in those 3 columns, one will take you too far, one will leave you too short, but one puts it pretty close.
Well,
Really close.
Between John and Jesus' death, between John's death and Jesus' death, it's not very long. So we're really not talking about much time there.
No, they're so overlapping, and and that's the point.
John's ministry, the result of John's ministry, as we see in Acts and that sort of thing, is still carrying on and having to be corrected. And so on and so forth.
Right, because people are still using it.
They're still using it. So.
But even John, when his own disciples are questioning, he says, go ask him if he's the one or if he's not. And the interesting part, when they come back after Jesus tells them, this is what you've seen, everything, John tells them, and the end of John chapter 3 is, I told you I must decrease and he must increase. He says, so now he's verified exactly what I told you. That he's the one. And so even John was telling his disciples that they needed to turn to Jesus, and obviously a lot of them did. They kept teaching that. They may have incorporated Jesus into the mix of it. I think that's what happened with Apollos, that it had been incorporated Jesus into the mix of it, but that we're still teaching John's baptism.
Well, I'll take an assumption you make. So, good assumption. Is that Apollos written? He knew all of what was going on back there. He may not have known those conversations. They weren't necessarily written down, possibly. They may have happened in one group of people that Jesus was there amongst them, and they talked about it, and John referenced back to it. But the people he had converted prior to that had gone off and lived in another city or someplace else. And so it took a while for that word to
Right.
go around.
Right, and I think you're exactly right there, Don. I agree with you, because once you started this, you had people coming in, and it says from all of Judea being baptized by John.
And then going back out.
Yeah, and then going back out.
They left.
And you had those feasts. People were trying to keep those feasts. And so they come back to Jerusalem for those feasts. Most of them would come there for the Passover and leave after Pentecost. And then they go back home. What are they going to teach when they go home? They're going to teach John's baptism. And I heard somebody say that Apollos must have been baptized by John. No, he was probably baptized by a disciple of John's and taught that. And even when they heard of the death of Christ, it would not be hard for to understand. We look at some people today, and that being incorporated into John's baptism. Because what did they say about Paul say about Apollos? Or Luke, excuse me. That he was teaching accurately the things concerning the Lord, except he only knew of John's baptism. That was the only thing Aquila and Priscilla had to correct. And there's an interesting thing there. If you read the context, John is actually, Apollos is publicly speaking. What'd they do? Aquila and Priscilla. They took him quite aside privately. He's obviously teaching error, but he doesn't know it's error. And unlike we often want to do today, go, whoa, wait a minute, you got to stop.
Well, how many times have you maybe experienced something like that in your lifetime? In that, I can think of myself, that you had learned something one way and you were teaching that. And then somebody says, well, hey, look, this is something, wait a minute, here's something, read this, what this says about it. And then all of a sudden you change your mind, okay, I understand that. Well, what I'm saying is not correct.
Right.
And so therefore you change your position on that.
And I've done that, and other people have done that.
But I can't go back 5 years ago when I was talking to somebody in another church someplace and I said that, go back to them and say, hey, I was wrong, it's just that I've changed my position.
Right. And hence the 10 men that Paul found. But my point about that was Aquila and Priscilla, they didn't publicly confront him. They took him away privately to explain it to him. Sometimes we can learn the subtleties too, me included. Here's a big point. Nowhere in the context of Daniel does it state that the 70 weeks are up to the destruction of Jerusalem, but up to the determination of the destruction of Jerusalem. Notice here the first one. And on the wing of abomination shall be one who makes desolate, even until the consummation which is determined is poured out on the desolate. That is the determination, where it's determined. Okay? When was it determined that Jerusalem would be destroyed, not just in the plot, but actually determined?
Jesus was teaching that back when he was alive.
There we go.
I wish I could gather you to me like a chick gathers, like a hen gathers her chickens, but, y'all gone off and it's gonna cost you.
Yeah, and there we go. And Luke 13, 34, 35. Oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the one who kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to her. How often I wanted to gather your children together as a hen gathers her brood under her wings, but you were not willing. See, your house is left to you desolate, and surely I say to you, you shall not see me until the time comes when you say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. This is Luke chapter 13. It's probably 2 years into his ministry according to Luke. The interesting part is, and sometimes we get the idea that everything that Jesus said was only said once. How many times have we preached on things in the scriptures more than once?
He was just preaching to different crowds and different people.
Different crowds, different people. So then you get in,
Repeating what he said over and over.
right. So you get into Matthew 23, the final week. And he records in verse 37 to 38, oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, those who kill the prophets and stone those who are sent to her. How often I wanted to gather your children together as hens gather her chicks under her wings, but you were not willing. See, your house is left to you desolate. I didn't finish out verse 38 because I wanted to point that out. Because here's what's really interesting. He is in the temple teaching this. And when he leaves the temple, the apostles start, and he said, pointing out how great the temple is, and he said, I tell you, not one stone be left on top of other. Starts Matthew 24, where we turn it off, and then to Matthew 24, he starts foretelling the destruction of Jerusalem. He gets down to verse 15, or what we have is listed verse 15. Therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet standing in the holy place, whoever reads, let him understand, and let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. That is a direct reference to verse 26 and 27. So on the wings of the abomination, what was the symbol of the Roman army?
Eagle.
An eagle.
Bird on a stick.
Bird on the stick, eagle. On wings. They had the wings spread out. When you see that. And then at the crucifixion, Jesus said, turning to them and said, Daughter of Jerusalem, do not weep for me, but weep for yourselves and for your children. For indeed the days are coming in which they will say, Blessed are the barren, wombs that never bore, and breasts which never nursed, for they will begin to say to the mountains, Fall on us, and to the hills cover. So in the middle of the week, 3.5 days, 3.5 years, if you take it 7 years. I believe Jesus was about 33.5 years old. Started his ministry at 30. He is crucified. He brings an end to offerings of sin. He brings reconciliation. He brings an end to the old covenant, brings in a new, makes it, establishes it. And the determination is done that Jerusalem will be laid desolate. Josephus records, and Josephus was a witness to the siege of Jerusalem, the destruction of the temple, the destruction of the walls, everything that happened. And not one Christian, he records that not one Christian was found inside Jerusalem. But later they would capture many in the mountains. And don't you think that some of those people, some of those women who had babies and knowing what was happening in Jerusalem and the things that were going on, all they wished their child had never been born. Knowing what's fixing to happen, what had happened. The last hole that they made was Herod's palace at Sodom. And they cast lots. The Jews did, rather than let the Romans kill them, they cast lots on who would kill whose family. Down to the last man, and the last man had to kill himself. Rebellion to the end. And so, what God promised, back in name, is brought forth through Christ. Determination made at Christ. So many things that if we just take time and look at them and break them down, and that is that point in that final week, the side cut off. But how long was he cut off for? 3 days. He resurrected to his everlasting throne, everlasting life. It was the final straw against the Jewish people. And he even foretold that. It's hard for the skeptic, even if you go to that point of 490 years of completeness of time, as close as you can put it into that time frame. The skeptic has to split hairs, so to speak, to keep from believing it. And that's an important part of God putting it in there for us. I think He wanted Daniel to understand that Jerusalem's sinning wasn't over with the return. Their rebellion against His will wasn't over. They would continue to rebel. Maybe not turning over to other gods, but still not keeping His will. And that was what would bring an end to it. And it's interesting, that temple's been gone for almost 2,000, well, over 2,000 years now. Or almost 2,000 years. So, they still don't have it. And as much as they may know they're a Jew, they don't know what tribe they're in. If they did, they'd have priests instead of these rabbis. They don't even know that. It's a two-edged sword. If God promised to bring desolation, He's going to bring desolation. But if He promised to forgive and bring people into His home, those that are obedient to Him, just as we've seen that He brought desolation, we know that He will deliver those who turn to His will. Let's sing and sing.
I hear the Savior say, thy strength indeed is small. Child of weakness, watch and pray. Find in me thine all in all. Spirit